On the bench today, we've got the brand new Losi LMT 2 monster truck, and this thing looks absolutely awesome. From tires to shocks to chassis to body, basically everything on this thing is new. Let's check it out. Even though the hexes are buried deep inside these wheels, a regular 4-way wrench will take them off. That's really nice to see. Underneath those, we do have 17mm aluminum hexes. That's a really nice update and should open up some pretty interesting wheel and tire choices. These are genuine BKT licensed tires. They're 6.4 inches in diameter and 4 inches wide. They come with a removable 17mm hex. This looks nice and thick. I don't think this is going to be stripping out anytime soon. This replaceable hex is nice not only if it does get stripped, but it gives us more choices for sizes and offsets. The wheels themselves are vented. As you can see, the tires are not. This is a very similar chevron pattern to the previous version. I believe these tires are a little bit bigger though. These beadlock rings are fake. These tires are glued on, but they are a convincing fake and they look really nice. One thing I did notice is that these tires are pretty heavy. As you can see, they are almost a full pound each at 15 ounces. That's of course going to put a lot of stress on the drivetrain. This drivetrain has been updated, which I'm really excited to check out. Unlike the previous version that was officially 3S out of the box, this is 4S out of the box, though I'm pretty curious to see if this drivetrain is going to be able to handle 6S. This thing does come with some pretty interesting new drive modes, which we are going to check out, but I'm more interested to see how this thing handles general bashing and jumping. The previous version was a really fun basher, but it was a little bit fragile out of the box in a few key areas. This body's absolutely beautiful. This is the Gravedigger version. They have this and the Son of a Digger version. This thing looks really, really nice. Unlike the previous version, there's a latch here in the back. That's because this body hinges forward. Unfortunately, we do still have two small body pins here on the sides. I would have loved to have seen latches here as well. I suspect a lot of people won't end up using these body pins, which could be detrimental to the longevity of the body. We might check that out too. As you can see, the body does open forward and it opens up to reveal a whole lot of new parts. There are just two screws that hold the entire body on. They are for the hinge in the front. And as you can see, there's a very complex and comprehensive roll cage under here. The roll cage itself looks like it's going to be extremely durable. It's attached to some nice thick Lexan, and it has attachment point / skid plates in 3 different places. This should help protect the body from getting damaged, though of course it probably still will once we take this thing on the big jump. The Gravedigger version has lights on the front, and conveniently those lights are connected with a JST connector, which means it's easy to unplug to take this body off. And with it removed, you get a good look at that rear latch, which looks pretty stout. It's got a real metal spring in there and feels pretty positive. I don't think that's going to be breaking anytime soon. Again, though, I would have loved to have seen latches on the side as well. Not sure why they didn't do that. And then there is a pretty good looking driver figure in there with a seat and a steering wheel. Underneath the body, things look somewhat familiar, but oh man, is there a lot different under here. Starting at the front, you can see they've addressed one of the big weak points on the original LMT, and that's this servo saver. This new unit is an absolute beast. It's fully metal inside and has Belleville washers instead of a standard coil spring. These are really interesting. They're like a regular washer, but they're curved, and you can stack them either in parallel or serial to get more strength or more movement. These appear to have been stacked up in serial, and overall, this looks really nice. I'm hoping this isn't something we'll have to upgrade right out of the box like you kind of had to on the original LMT. That's attached to this steering link that actually feels kind of interesting. I don't think this is regular nylon. It feels a bit softer than what I'm used to, and it's almost squishy in texture. That's really neat. As you can see, it's not in double shear here on the servo horn, but they did design this so that it can't just pop off. That's what this little wider washer here is for. I'd love to see that in double shear, but again, we'll have to see how it holds up with some bashing. This Spectrum S680 servo is also brand new. I don't think we've seen this on anything else. To take a closer look at that, first we need to disconnect it in this brand new radio box. I wonder if this is going to be waterproof. We can see that no, this is not a waterproof receiver box, and we can also see that one of my cords got crushed. Hopefully that's not going to be a problem because that goes straight to the ESC. Underneath that, we've got the new Spectrum 6400A. That's what's going to give us those drive modes we'll be looking at in a little bit, but for now we just need to get this servo disconnected. And now we can take a closer look at what's new on this thing. Pulling this out right off the bat, one thing I've noticed is that this is an aluminum top to this servo. This seems like it's a bit better than the 665 we've been seeing in a lot of the RTR trucks. And pulling these Phillips screws out of the bottom, we can see there are O-rings on there. That's really nice to see. Obviously, these are going to be machine screws because they're going into aluminum. So far, I am liking what I'm seeing on this servo. Popping off the bottom, we can see we have a pretty big brushed motor in here and a nice looking circuit board. That circuit board is glued in place, so it's not just flapping around, and there is an O-ring here on the bottom of the case. This O-ring appears to be split to make room for the wiring to come through, but it should work just fine. Now, for the real money, pulling the top off, We're greeted with a decent looking gear train. We've got a mixture of brass and steel gears here. The teeth on the final gear look pretty stout, and we do have some brass bushings here in the top. Obviously, the biggest update on this servo from something like the 665 is going to be this aluminum top housing. Having aluminum here instead of plastic is going to help keep the gears in place, and it should help prevent them from getting stripped. Behind that, we have the same steel reinforced plastic drag link, and these knuckles also look very similar, though they are a new part number, so I suspect they have been beefed up. Right above those is something really exciting, and that's these new shocks with internal springs. These things look really realistic. Let's check them out. As you can see, the shocks, shock mounts, and center braces have all been doubled up, so it looks like these are basically identical. We do still have the multi-piece upper mount. This is a little bit annoying as these parts are kind of easy to lose. Underneath that, we have an aluminum shock cap, a silver aluminum shock body, this pretty cool looking fake reservoir, a little bump stop down here, and it actually doesn't feel like there's a spring in here, so maybe the spring's on this one. Let's take this apart first to make sure. We can see this is definitely an emulsion style shock. We've got the bleeder up here and no bladder. Seems to be pretty full. And we've got the O-ring down here at the bottom, which is a decent way to do emulsion style shocks. And then internally, yeah, there's no spring in here. I wonder if there's actually a shock absorber in here, or if it's just the spring. Only one way to find out. And no, this is both a shock and the spring. Very interesting. So basically all they've done here is they've just taken a regular shock and stuck a spring inside of it. Pretty simple, but I guess it works. By the way, these bleeder screws are both held in with Loctite, and they have little copper washers on them, so these definitely shouldn't be leaking out of the box. I didn't put more thread locker on these, so maybe they'll leak now. We'll see. These upper and lower links appear to be the same as on the previous version of the LMT, though the axle itself is definitely not. Starting with the servo mount, this is a new part number, though it doesn't look too much stronger than the original one was. Overall, it looks pretty good, though I'm not sure how much of a match it's going to be for that new servo. Again, we'll find out. These dual shock mounts are obviously also new. One thing I wanted to mention is that all of these screws are YFS branded. That's really nice to see, as they do seem to be high quality, and high quality hardware is important for future maintenance and repair, as it tends to get stripped out a lot less frequently than low quality stuff. The plastics on these also feel really good and high quality. That's kind of a subjective thing, but the feel on these is really nice, and that extends to all of this axle and housing. I believe these kingpin retaining screws have been updated. I think they were smaller before. The kingpins themselves look the same though, and I believe these front universal shafts are also the same. They do seem pretty stout though. This kingpin system is fairly simple, though it is quite robust, and I actually like it a lot. It puts the entire kingpin in double shear, which makes it very strong. And overall, I've got high hopes for these slightly updated front knuckles. These front hubs are also a new part number. They appear fairly similar to the old ones, though they probably are beefed up a little bit as well. In a separate plastic bag, we do get additional front hubs and rear lockouts. I suspect these are going to be a different caster in the front and different toe-in on the rear. That's nice to see included in the package. The front and rear drive shaft are the same part number as on the previous version. Overall, I never really had any problems with these, though there definitely are some sweet upgrades available for them. If you want to see the most detailed teardowns on YouTube, make sure you get subscribed, because we do this kind of thing here all the time, and you're not going to want to miss what's coming. I thought I was going to get away without taking these sway bar links off, but nope, there are screws hiding under it. These definitely do have to come off. Which brings us to the main difference in these axles. Losi has gone to a 2-piece design. The previous version used a 4-piece design, which allowed for an easier removal of this differential, but it weakened the entire structure. This back half being one solid piece is going to make this a lot stronger. Of course, unfortunately, it also makes it a lot harder to take apart. Right off the bat, the first thing I notice is they're using some diabolical grease on these gears. This has a high sulfur content. It's silver. You need to be careful with this, because it's going to get everywhere and it's gonna stink. Gonna wipe that off of there. The thing about these gears is that you really don't need that much grease in order to lubricate them. The grease that's on the teeth themselves is pretty much all that's getting used, and even that's only a microscopic amount. Most of what you see here is just a waste. Now, what's immediately apparent on this differential is the differential housing is different. This isn't a new part number, it's the housing used on the Losi 8. The ring gear, however, appears to be the same part number as it was before. And internally, this is going to be very similar to what we saw before. They're using 1 million weight fluid. And because we have the Losi 8 housing, we do have some Losi 8 bits in here. But as you can see, these are all sintered steel gears, so the ring gear does appear to be machine steel. The pinion gear also appears to be machine steel, and that's really nice to see, as this is a pretty heavy truck, and this is not that big of a differential. Let me quickly get this put back together, because there's a lot more new to see. One definite weak point on the original LMT were these sway bars, and these are updated, though it looks like a lot of the parts are the same. I'm definitely curious to see how these hold up through some bashing, as they used to fall apart fairly easily. Those are mounted to a chassis that looks pretty similar to the previous version, though this one is painted instead of anodized, and it has been updated a bit. There's also a new wheelie bar in the back, as well as that new mount for the body latch and an antenna mount. Moving into the middle, it appears as though we have a new battery tray. This is really interesting, as it looks like it gives us a couple of different options for battery mounting. Removing this rubber strap actually reveals a dual layer tray. So if you wanted to run a smaller battery, you could run it really low center of gravity, but they include this foam block you can shove in there if you want to run a regular battery a little bit higher. We've also got a bunch of battery strap options in here for that lower CG mount, as well as side mounts up here at the top. A lot of options here, and that's really nice to see. Next to that, though, is something I'm very excited about, and that's this 130 amp 4S ESC. Checking out the manual for the programming options, of course, we can see Farmadeus, Motor Breckenkraft. Wait a minute, that's the wrong language. Checking out the manual, we can see we have running mode, drag brake force, low voltage cutoff, punch levels, max brake force, max reverse force, neutral range, timing, motor rotation, and critically BEC voltage, which can go up to 7.4 volts, but appears to be set at 6 volts out of the box. This manual obviously also discusses the bewildering set of controls on the transmitter. As you can see, at first this looks like a standard DX3, but then you see unlimited, wheelie, freestyle, target angle, brake rate, roll trim. There's a lot going on here. Fortunately, there is a quick start guide that sort of explains everything to you as far as what different modes do which sorts of stunts. I am definitely curious to see just how easy these things are to actually pull off, though. I'm going to show you my very first initial attempts at these, because that's what you're going to be experiencing when you take this thing out of the box, and I want you to know what to expect right from the beginning. That 130 amp ESC is going to be powering a new, larger 2800 kV motor, which runs through a pretty neat gear train. Let me pull these covers off and show you what I'm talking about. This is a split cover design. Pulling both of these off, though, we can see we've got a fairly complex system here. We do have a Mod 1 machine pinion. As you can see, the motor is mounted in holes, so you don't have the ability to adjust your mesh manually. This has its advantages and disadvantages. Disadvantage, obviously, is you don't get to adjust your mesh manually. Advantage is that it can't slip. We've got an intermediate gear here, and underneath this little clip, we have what's known as a cush drive. There's sometimes some confusion as to what this cush drive does. Its function is pretty simple. Basically, it adds a rubber coupling between the input and the output. And this performs a similar function to a slipper clutch, where when you have a shock load, it absorbs some of that shock and smooths out the shock impulse, meaning that less maximum force is transmitted into these gears and into your motor, helping save things from getting damaged. And then that power is transmitted through another very similar differential to what we saw on the front. This also has 1 million weight fluid in it, and that power is transmitted to the rear axle, which is the same as the front axle, except it has lockouts instead of steering, though you can install steering on here for 4-wheel if you want. Okay, guys, I think that covers pretty much everything that's new on the Losi LMT 2.0. Let me get this together, and let's go see what it can do. All right, guys, first things first, let's see what kind of top speed we can get out of this thing. Being on 4S now, I expect it to be fairly hard to control. That's full throttle. Oh yeah, she starts to wander. It is kind of wet out here this morning, but we should still get decent traction. Oh no, she wants to spin around. Let's try that one more time. Okay, that wasn't quite full throttle, but pretty close. All right, here we go. See if we can get full throttle out of her. Full throttle. All right, let's see what we got. Okay, 40 miles an hour. That's pretty good, and I think it can do quite a bit more than that with good traction and maybe a better driver. Let's check out those stunt modes. First thing is going to be wheelie mode. They say you should do this on good, hard surfaces, but again, most people don't have access to that kind of thing, so let's see what we can do without it. And oh yeah, it definitely holds a wheelie. That was actually really good. I wasn't doing that. Let me see if I can get it to come by doing that, and you'll be able to hear it doing it on its own. Okay guys, that's actually better than I thought it was gonna be. That's pretty fun. Let's do that again. I didn't quite get that one right, but that actually really does make it easier. And that is pretty cool. Now there's an angle knob. I'm gonna go ahead and turn that up a bit, and let's see if we can get a bit of a higher angle out of it. Yep, it is doing a higher angle. Look at that. That's awesome. I can't steer it, of course. So So basically all I'm doing here is giving it enough throttle to get it up in the air, and then I just hold the throttle and it takes care of holding it at that angle. And it just works. It works great. No complaints whatsoever. Let's try a stoppie. Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna have enough traction for a stoppie on this grass. Oh no, there we go. There we go. She's doing it. Nice. Okay, guys, that is absolutely awesome. I'm sorry I'm laughing so much, but I think that's a good thing. Let's do that again. Yeah, there she goes. There she goes. And we can even turn during the stoppie. All right, yeah, this is very, very cool. I thought it was going to be a silly gimmick, and it is a gimmick, but it's not a silly gimmick. It's an awesome gimmick. Oh my God, I'm almost on one wheel. Oh, that's fantastic. All right, we've got one more thing to do, and that's bicycling. I'm gonna put it in the freestyle mode for that. And supposedly all I have to do is start turning. Again, I'm not sure this is gonna work on wet grass, but like I said, this is the very first time I'm doing this, and this is the kind of experience you're gonna get. All right, so a bicycle is clearly far more challenging than a wheelie or a stoppie. Let me try some more practice with this and get back to you. All right, guys, I've been trying for about a half a pack here, and I just cannot get this thing up on two wheels for a bicycle. This is almost certainly down to my skill and the terrain. Obviously, the terrain is not great, and they also say the tires need to be broken in properly before it can really do well. But so far, I have not been able to get this thing to bicycle one time. Again, though, this is probably just down to my skill. So that's definitely going to take some practice, but what doesn't really take practice is wheelies, which are pretty much perfect right out of the box. Very easy, even on not ideal terrain, and stoppies, which also work very, very well pretty much immediately. Let's see how this thing actually bashes, though. This is a high-power, high center of gravity monster truck with solid axles, so you definitely don't want to expect it to bash like a modern basher like the Creighton. It's going to be less stable, less able to handle big, rough bumps, but it's going to have a charm of its own, and that's where the beauty of this truck comes in. It's kind of its own bashing experience. Being 4S, this thing does have an absolutely wild amount of power, so if you just jam on the throttle, you're going to lose control of it pretty quickly, though it does seem to like to land on its wheels most of the time, and overall, this thing is fun. It puts a smile on your face, it has more than enough power to bash around, and for what it is, it does actually handle pretty well, as long as you're not going too fast. Once you get above a certain speed, it does tend to lose control. Like you saw on the speed tests, it just doesn't handle really high speed well, especially on less than ideal terrain. These tires are big and floaty, which is great for stunts, but not necessarily great for driving. I'm gonna see if we can do a high-speed off-road pass here without losing control. You know, that is pretty good. I definitely could see it being better with some better tires, but these tires feel better than they did on the original LMT. And other than the fact that you're gonna be retrieving it all the time, this thing does bash pretty well. Let's see how it jumps. For once, we're actually gonna use the PNW RC Madness ramp for its intended purpose. Whoa! Okay, that was more jump than I was expecting. That thing got some air. I think it actually went out of frame. Let's try that again. I don't want to break it yet. Okay, yeah, this thing can jump, and it actually lands pretty well for what it is. A little bit of a bounce, but that's to be expected. Let's see if it'll do a backflip. Oh yeah, backflips, no problem whatsoever. This thing's actually more fun to jump than I expected it to be. Let's get a little bit more speed. Air control is fantastic. Heard a little bit of a crunch there, but seems okay. A little bit more speed. So like I said, don't want to break it just yet. Yeah, this thing is great. Another little bit of a crunch there, though. It doesn't seem to be breaking anything, but it doesn't sound great. Let's do one more jump. Oh! And we broke it. All right, guys, before I give you my thoughts on the truck, let me give you my thoughts on the drive modes. I thought this was gonna be a gimmick, and it kind of is, but it's also a lot of fun. Right out of the box, Wheelies and stoppies, no problem. Basically any terrain. I was on wet grass. It worked great. Pop it up, it holds itself. Tons of fun. You can adjust the target angle for that here, and it just works really, really well. I wasn't able to get this thing to bicycle, but that's probably a skill issue and a terrain issue. The manual says you need to break in these tires before it'll work properly because they have really sharp corners out of the box. Obviously, these aren't broken in. So again, I don't blame the truck or the system for that failure. And I also kind of think it's a good thing because you get your stoppies and your wheelies right out of the box, no problem. But then you've got something that takes some practice. And when you get that, you've gained a skill. Now, putting that aside and talking about the truck itself, this is pure LMT. If you've driven the first version, you'll know how this one drives for the most part. That being said, the extra power does make a big difference. This thing out of the box now has more power than the chassis can handle, which I think is a good thing. You can always turn it down. It's hard to turn it up. These new shocks seem to work really, really well overall. I do think these shock reservoirs are kind of a gimmick, and mine tended to pop off and get in the way of the shock working properly. I'll probably just take these off. Though, of course, they come with the truck. You can choose whether to have them on or not, and they do look cool. I had no problem with the sway bars, which is a nice change from the first version. I also did all of that driving without these side body clips installed, and it didn't seem to be a problem. Of course, I wouldn't recommend you do that, but I assume a lot of people are going to forget them, so I didn't put them in, and it works okay. I had no problem with the front axle or with the rear axle, though the problem I did have really isn't a surprise. These are very similar, if not the exact same rod ends that we had on the previous generation. They were a weak point in that generation, and they're a weak point here. If you're just doing general driving around and bashing, it won't be a problem, but if you had a bad landing on a jump, it's gonna break. Fortunately, there's a huge aftermarket to fix this, so it's not that big of a deal, though it would have been nice to see an upgrade in this vehicle. You might want to consider upgrading them anyway because they're gonna get loose, and see how much movement there is in this axle. That movement changes the geometry of everything, and as they loosen up, it's gonna make this thing harder and harder to drive. Again, that's just gonna depend on how you're bashing it. If you're not bashing it hard, it might take a long time for that to happen. But as you can see, there's already a decent amount of play in these, and that will affect how it drives. So who is the Losi LMT 2.0 for? Well, there's a certain group of people, and you know who you are, that you're just gonna buy it anyway, so just go buy it. Don't worry about what I have to say. Now, for the rest of us, the bashers out there, the people that are just looking for some fun, this can definitely provide it. It's not gonna handle as well as something like an Arrma Kraton. It just can't. These solid axles are a limitation, but it provides a unique experience that you're not gonna get anywhere else. The solid axles make it drive differently than pretty much anything else out there, and those modes are a ton of fun. Now, this truck is more expensive than the LMT1 was, but you do get a ton of updates and upgrades for it, and I would say based on not having to upgrade the steering out of the box and probably not having to upgrade these axles too quickly, I think the extra money is worth it. I probably wouldn't recommend this as someone's first basher because the versatility isn't quite as good as something like a Kraton, but if you either loved the first version or you're really curious as to what a solid axle monster truck basher is like, you could do a lot worse than the LMT 2.0. And if you're curious about more videos from this channel, you could do a lot worse than clicking on one of these.